So the previous presentation was fantastic, and we talk a lot about technology and what technology will change, and what we can do and how much we can do. So I have tried to create something that I like because of my half background in social sciences. I'd like to talk about what is the other side, and the other side means not just in the corporations, but in the world in general. What is the impact of the technologies we are creating and developing, and how much we have to take that in consideration with our own teams, with our own employees, and also in general with the communities we are working with. Because every technologist, usually I say, needs to have a social responsibility too. It is not only about creating, but it needs to be also about how do we put the foundations needed for people to embrace that, rather than just accept and ask for more and more and more. So I have put down three numbers in the next three slides. So I will start with the first one. Next slide, please. So we have 3.5 billion years of life on Earth. When we talk about time, when we talk about fast and month and weeks, within the context of life on Earth, it's a very small amount of time. And so, and I always like this number, and this is not mine. The next three numbers are not invented by me or even my idea to talk about it. Is a presentation I heard a few months ago from a brilliant guy, a researcher in Denmark, that was doing a lot of work about resilience and things around that. And so I really like this number because it gives you a context about the fact that we are here for a long time, not necessarily human beings, that's the next number, but life on Earth. And we will very likely be here for quite a long time too, even when our generation is no longer on Earth. Next number, next slide. The next slide is the human life, which is about 200,000 years. And this is interesting to see how have human life developed and how is the world we work with has developed over time. And I'm now 33, and I usually think about the fact that probably 10 years ago, when I was 23, the world was incredibly different. Well, let's say 15 years ago, when I was 18, was incredibly different. So the last 15 years, or last 10 to 15 years, everything has changed so much that you kind of think about what was before kind of doesn't exist anymore. And that is interesting when you think about how much time we are on Earth. We have life on Earth, and we have human life on Earth. How fast is the pace of change these days? And that is the message here, is we have been here for a long time, but the pace of change has increased drastically. But the problem may happen is that we don't have necessarily got into a course or training in how to deal with this fast pace of change. But we demand the society and people to accept that change and embrace that change, and more, to even feel happy about it. So we got to start talking about what is the real meaning of that change in the society and people around, and what we have to do to tackle that. So next slide. So this was an interesting one, and I just put it there because it's funny. Is the 99% DNA share DNA we have with chimpanzees. This is interesting because a lot of the things that we automate and we are creating are things that do not necessarily need our frontal lobe, right? So they are very physical, very manual. A lot of things are fairly easily automated by machines, but we have something very specific and unique of our in our brain, which is the frontal lobe, which allows us to have feelings and emotions and critical thinking and think about future and planning and so many things that are making us unique in this world, that we also have to think about how to handle it. It is not enough to just say we automate everything and we're going to be great and we're going to simplify and connect everything. We also do the same in mass. But there is always the flip side. And what is the other side? And what is the side of someone else receiving this message? And that's what I like to talk. Next slide, please. So this is a very simple, but what I usually like to say is up to probably 12 years ago, we would wake up in the morning, and I can't talk about everyone, but very likely you would not read the news right away. Rather, you would probably take your breakfast, do something, go to your car, probably buy the newspaper on your way to your car or to your train or whatever you use to commute. And in between the moment you woke up to a point you buy something, you probably had half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, and then you are buying something that has 24 hours delay or 12 hours, depending on 6 hours, depending on the magazine. And we were perfectly comfortable with that. Doesn't mean that we do not like to know things on time, but the fact is, we were still okay to just check the news online, where you had most of the on-time type of news. So now the world changed to a point where studies say that 90 to 95% of people wake up in the morning and the first thing they do is to check their phone. And it's not just checking their phone, is they go through their emails, they go through their news, they check things. This is a massive behavioral change. And the reason why I bring this up is not just behavioral change in the fact that we are consuming faster, which obviously needs to be taken in consideration when we build up technologies, when we talked about now the blockchains and the IoTs and stuff like that. Everything is a way to simplify, to reduce time, to give information faster, to make better informed decisions. But it's also, on the other side, a much higher stressful type of environment, because your brain no longer has the peace of waking up and do something chill. The first thing you start doing is to stress it out with news, with emails, with problems, with whatever you're going to check on your phone. So this change of behavior has a significant impact from to what we have to design in technology, but also how do we have to think about the impacts on the behaviors, and as I will talk later, the impact of that in our, for example, workforce in regards to performance, to ability to execute, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. So just interesting numbers, and this, of course, it's very hard to make it scientific, but this is the most scientific I can get for now. Is there are some studies that predict 210 million jobs to be at risk of being automated. And when I say at risk, I really made it risk in quotes, because it's risk could be also a positive thing, but is at risk in the sense of those 210 million jobs will very likely not exist the way we know it today. 47% are in the areas of food preparation, cleaning services, driving services, agricultural, and this type of work that is more easily automated. And 70% is predicted to be impacting mostly the younger generations, which is obviously because we have a longer expected working time, which is obvious because of the retirement age, and therefore it's obviously that's going to impact the younger generations. There are a few things that we have to take from these numbers. Automating or anything to do with better technology has a fantastic impact on improving companies' efficiencies, to reduce cost to serve, to improve customer experience. But, and that is the message to be taken here, is it will also create a gap. And that gap means, what do you do with these 210 million people that will not have a job the way you know it today? And so, and this is the next thing that we'll have to talk about, is we have to create skills. We have to convert skills, be different type of employees. It's all true. However, that isn't enough to just say, we will change the workforce and we will give them training. There are fundamental things that have to be changed in the way we prepare the generations to come in order to be able to embrace the fast pace of change I just talked. And that fast pace of change is just getting faster and harder, and we don't necessarily tackle the root cause. Everyone knows these numbers that are flying around, the amount of projects that fail that are IT related. We keep on bringing very fancy buzzwords and very fancy projects and very fancy technologies, but the success rate of those implementations keeps on being very, very high. And so, though we keep on bringing more and more and more, we don't necessarily make it better in terms of success rate. And that is very likely because we keep on tackling the surface of the issue. rather tackling the root cause. The root cause, in my opinion, is that a very big percentage of the population isn't ready to change at the pace we are trying to. And it isn't ready, and it won't be ready by a change management strategy. Because a change management strategy will go very often under the assumption that you can connect their mission, you can connect them to a mission, you can connect them to a vision, you can connect them to a target. The problem is that is not always true. And so the biggest failure, and of course my opinion, is the fact that we aren't really preparing, and we weren't really preparing people to be ready to this change and to embrace that change in a simplified and sophisticated manner that we all expect, and the pace that we all expect. Next slide. So that's one of the first things I like to bring is creating and embracing new jobs and new skills is what we want when we think about the workforce we're going to change by introducing new technologies. The question to be answered is this a pure organizational change, or is this something deeper, what has to do with the way we educate, the way we live, the way we sleep, the way we feel about the change in regards to our own life, and based on that, we can then embrace much more transformation. We can really change business and change societies because we have the right mindset around the society. So this is a very philosophical discussion, but it's a philosophical discussion that if we don't have it ever, we will just keep on having 70% or 75% of failure rates in our transformations. But we'll keep on bringing more and more buzzwords, because as I usually say, the way we operate these days is, if we would have to do an analogy with our house, what we are doing is we bought a minefield and we build our house on top of it, and we just hope we don't step into a mine, so it doesn't explode. That's how we are operating often. It's not always. We have a lot of companies that have done this right, a lot of countries that have done this right, but still a very, very large proportion of people and companies and countries that are operating on a minefield, and we just keep on doing. Next slide, please. So one of the things I like to bring in, and I like to believe I'm better presenting than writing down slides, so you gotta bear with me, is the sleep deprivation. So the sleep deprivation has two important things. First, we are pushing employees to work more, and this is not always, but we are putting a lot of pressure on employees to work, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to work more hours, but because of the pressure, because of the markets, because of coronas, because of everything, the pressure on working is harder. Very few countries have got into this reducing working hours, reducing working days, and every time this is coming, there is a lot of criticism around saying, yeah, if you reduce the working days, there is no way you're going to improve your performance. Well, now there are a lot of studies, and there is a lot of behavioral science behind the fact that if you don't sleep right, you don't perform right, and you don't accept change right. So let's bring this, for example, a digital transformation within an organization that is heavily based on a workforce that works on shifts and that has changes on the sleeping patterns over and over. The fact that these people sleeps half an hour less than the 8 expected amount of hours you should sleep per day, this right away has an impact on their acceptance and their mental state to accept change. If you sleep less, people that say that I'm okay to sleep 5 hours a day, that's not true. That no one is okay to sleep 5 hours a day. That's scientifically proven. What happens is that you got used to it. But you got used to it not because you are good at it, but just because you got used to it. So your brain needs to rest. And what happens, in studies have shown that, is over a period of time, you get used to it and you operate not on your full capacity, but rather the capacity that you allowed yourself to operate, while you still believe that you are working on the full capacity, because you lose the sense of what is your real capacity, because you are continuously mentally tired though you don't even realize it anymore. And you can research, you can go online, you're going to figure that out. There are plenty of researches around the impact of every half an hour you are lacking on sleeping, on average of 8 hours a day. And there is a point in time that is just really significant impacting your performance. And so I like to bring this up because this lack of sleep of our employees in our organizations is really one of the biggest issues we have. And that impacts technology development, that impacts technology revolution, that impacts change, that impacts performance. And so we need to start when we talk about change management, one of the things we have to talk about in companies is how do we get our employees to sleep better? And how many companies you know that do really address that? How many change management strategies you know in organizations that address sleep deprivation in employees? Very few. And that's something to think about because it's one of the biggest impact factors on lower performance and lower ability to perform on a high level of commitment and so on and so forth. But it also has an impact on their personal life. One thing is in the work. Other thing is what we have to do to make sure that they also have a good life balance. Because if they have a terrible life at home, where they are tired, they are more reactive, they discuss with family, they discuss with their wife or their husband, their children, there's a lot of pressure. All of that builds up the fact that we have a society and more people, and of course society is a very vague and general term, so you gotta put it in the right context. Depends on the country, depends on the culture, depends on a lot of things. But in general, these employees and these organizations are not necessarily in a state of mind that really allows them to be really ready to embrace change, to embrace technology, to embrace revolutions. And so maybe change management needs to start thinking about mental state and state of mind rather than just organizational change. Next slide. And so, and then comes in the second thing what I usually like to talk about. Sleep deprivation impacts present. State of mind impacts present. Change management impacts your present. The problem is, and that's why I started with 200,000 years on Earth of life, of human life. There is a whole world after the next 10 years and 20 years. And so, and that world comes out of our children. And now it becomes a bit more philosophical, but think about the technology and the technologies as people that are changing the world. And they are changing the world to better in some things and to worse in some other things. I recommend everyone to read Brad Smith's book, the guy from Microsoft, about the technology being a tool or a weapon. And that's pretty much the meaning of it. You can be very, very good at it or very, very bad at it. It depends how do you use it. And so by changing the world, we also need to think about what is the impact of the generations to come, what is the impact to the generations to come in what we are creating today. So let's forget the blockchain and the IoTs and all these AI technologies that we have that are doing fantastic work on immediate things and medium short-term things and research in disease treatment is all fantastic. But the most of the companies that do not operate in that level, they operate in commodities, in basic things, in normal things, where where the employees are working, and they are stressed and they don't sleep, and there's a lot of anxiety. The economy is continuously under pressure to grow. The 2%, the 3%, the debts is all piling up continuously in our day-to-day. And here comes the fact that this is all a ripple effect. It will create a ripple effect to what comes next. So I have a daughter, and maybe most of you have children, and she's, let's say, 5 or 6 years old, or 2, 3 years old, or 1 year old, or a newborn. The primary socialization and the secondary socialization are one of the most critical things, most critical periods to develop the ability of our children to interact in a society, to be sociologically involved, to understand the way society works, to understand the way human beings in relationship works, and to be able to develop that ability. The moment we are tired, the moment we are under pressure, the moment that we are stressed, What we are doing is we are educating our children, or we are setting the standard of the primary socialization as a stressful, complicated, sleep-deprived, first thing in the morning is check the phone type of environment. And so that is the generation that we will create. And doesn't matter how much technology we create, doesn't matter how much technology we roll out, that is the world we will create. It's a world that takes this as the baseline. So now when I talk about the past, I talk about my parents, right? My mom, my dad, my grandparents, the way they live. When my children will talk about me, and the children of my children, they will talk about this. They will talk about this type of environment. So we have all to think about when we roll out technology, when we create company transformations, when we design transformations, that there is a whole thing outside of the offices we work that we have to talk about, and we have to address in order to create the conditions for the transformations and the growth and the evolution to happen in a sustainable way, rather than always in this getting more and more and more, do more and more and more, sleep less and less, be up to as much as we can. This is all very demanding, and we are not really and hopefully and happily, a lot of companies are doing a lot of things with life balance, but technology has this flip side, is creating also a lot of stress. Next slide. And so, and I need to speed up. The one of the other areas I also like to address is to do with change. And we are talking a lot here about change and change management and organizational change and transformation and rolling out technology. And it has to do with the fact that in the vast majority of the companies, the gap between the senior leadership and the operating group of employees, it's very high, and it's very, very, very big. And that's okay. But the problem is the needs of the senior manager or the senior director or the vice president or whatever middle management is really different than a person working on a shop floor or in a retail shop or in a truck. So whenever we start building transformations and start thinking about engagement and addressing the different levels of the organization, what we really have to think about is that there is a person there that's going to think about the transformation coming with blockchain and IoT, not in the full power of that technology, but rather to think about, this is going to kill my job and I don't know how to pay my mortgage. That's what's driving their mind. So if we go there with champions and change management champions, and that doesn't change the fact that they're still afraid of losing their job and having to pay their mortgage. So we need to think about that as hard it is our job to design those transformations, and usually I say as hard as our job to tell someone that is getting fired, is much harder to be in the receiver side of the equation. It's much harder to know that something's going to change dramatically. It's much harder to know that you don't have the skills for that, and right away you don't even have the bandwidth to really learn a lot more, because you have to pay your mortgage, you have to have 3 jobs, and by the way, you don't have more time anymore because you are very tired, you are super exhausted. So change management is not only about creating a strategy and how to explain locals that this is fantastic. It's rather to think about, you know what, we probably have to think about a different way. And I don't have that way, to be honest. But obviously, there are really a big difference. There is a really big difference between those levels of the organizations that have to pay paycheck by paycheck, and their mindsets, it's not focused on the big company goals and strategy and vision. That's great, but their goal is, how do I make it to the next month? And if we don't think about it, and this is a really big part of our society, I came from Portugal, where 95% of the people makes somehow around the minimum salary, which is something around 600 euros. So that's a country of European Union. That's not so far away from us. We need to take this in consideration when we design technologies, when we design strategies, when we design transformations. Otherwise, we just get behind and we keep on not tackling the right issues. Next slide. So the next one is pretty much to talk about the education, talk about the future. The cars have changed over the last 100 years. The factories have changed over the last 100 years. The schools have not changed so much. They had a lot of changes, but the fundamental principle of the school remains the same. In very few examples, where they had done different. The results are fantastic. And we have Finland, we have Khan Academies, we have Montessori's. And I'm not a politician. I'm not any kind of ideology. So I don't really care. What I care is that from a technology standpoint and from a world evolution standpoint, we need to start thinking about how are we creating the educational models to prepare our students, our children, to be up to this change, pace of change, to be up to this ability to have new skills, new types of ways of working, changing jobs overnight. So they need to be more flexible, more creative. And we can't treat individuals in the same way. Individuals are individuals exactly because their individuality, and children have their individuality. We can't robotize them and then expect them that 20 years later they are flexible to change jobs overnight, because that's what happens today. Vast majority of the educational systems, they robotize, and I'm saying robotize, you can't see the camera, so it's obviously it's not in a bad ways. We have systems that have 20, 30 kids in a classroom, and they are educated in the same way. But guess what? They all have different ways of thinking. They all have different backgrounds. Sometimes they have problems. I give my example. I am heavily dyslexic. Until I was 20 years old, no one had any clue. Until I was 12, they thought I was idiot because I couldn't catch anything that the teacher was telling when she was putting something on the board. I made it quite okay after a while. And so the systems need to also think about, and we as leaders and everyone that has a responsibility to create change needs to also work and understand that we need to be consistent. We can't ask kids and children to be following standard ways of educating and then asking them to be dynamic and flexible later on. We got to start from the bottom and tackling the root cause, and that is how do we prepare generations to come to be more flexible. Next one. So usually in the other slide I had, which I thought was the one I said, I usually say change management is a tactical, education is strategic. So you can change something as a tactical move, but if you want to really create a way of making this sustainable, you got to change the education, because then you don't have to handle change management strategies. That will just happen naturally because people will be much more prepared to change, to be dynamic, to live in a more dynamic world. So if you tackle the change management on today and tomorrow, you're going to be tactically addressing it. But if you want to prepare companies that want to be here for a quite long time, you got to start thinking about education, because that's the strategic way. Because 20%, 25% in the world are children, but they are 100% of our future, and we can't just disregard it. Next slide. So this is the 1%, right? At the end, everything kind of links. The frontal lobe, our way of thinking, our creativity, our entrepreneurship, our imagination, future thinking. We will automate. We will create different ways of working. A lot of the things that we don't need will be just put away. So the frontal lobe, the 1%, and obviously it's not exactly like that scientifically, but you just take it as image, is where we have to put the effort, is where we have to improve. It's where we have to bring everyone and all the society around to be a lot more focused on the 1% rather than on the automated task they do in a factory. And to do that, it is not just enough to create new technology. We have, as I said, all over this presentation, we have to tackle root cause issues we have in the society. Otherwise, we will just keep on failing. And piling up failures won't bring us anywhere, rather than just increase the level of frustration. Next slide. So I will finish by one of, I think is my favorite sentence, and it's from Albert Einstein. And it's my favorite because it shows what I usually say, and that is individuals are individuals and they have to be handled by their individuality. That happens at my home, happens in the company, happens in anywhere. If we address individuals by their individuality, we are one step closer to be successful. So if everybody, and I would just read it, everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by his ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. Because a fish doesn't have that ability to climb a tree, but has a whole bunch of other abilities that we have to explore. Look at transformation not just as a way to roll out technology, but rather as a way to explore the ability and capabilities that our employees, our people, our friends, our colleagues, our family have. And if we do that, if we maximize that, then I think there is a fantastic world ahead of us. If we keep on not doing it, then we'll keep on increasing sleep deprivation, stress, and a much more stressful world than we should have. Thank you very much.